Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Genshin Impact has been out for quite a while now, and with it, many characters have risen to the top of the meta only to have fallen off. Being the madman that I am, I manually inputted all the Abyss 12 data to figure out, with math and statistics, which characters have fallen off harder than your mother. Jokes in 2025. In this video, we'll go over the top 8 featured 5-star characters that fell off in Genshin Impact's meta. Ever since Natlan's release, there's no denying it, power creep is finally starting to pick up and rear its ugly head in Genshin Impact. And with said power creep, some of our favorite characters were caught in the crossfire and hardly see the light of day in the Spiral Abyss. Although you probably can't really see the light of day anyway. Now, I want to add the disclaimer that I apologize in advance if your favorite character is on this list. Just because your waifu Aloy might have an amazing role in the story with an incredible design that pioneered the gacha industry, that doesn't necessarily mean that she's the best choice for clearing Abyss 12. And check out this segue of the century to today's sponsor, Arknights. Arknights is a fantasy-themed strategic RPG that just dropped its brand new side story, I Pettori de Veluti. Pardon my Italian, running from April 24th to May 22nd. I Pettori de Veluti continues from where Il Siracusano left off with the brand new city, Carnivali, with tons of exclusive stages and tons of rewards. And what is an update without brand new operators? First up, we have Natlan the Decadanza. Not only is she a fan favorite, she's also a brand new limited 6-star Mech Accord caster. Her drone-powered arts damage is perfect for controlling the battlefield across the entire map. Next we have Crown Slayer, a 6-star you can earn completely for free just by playing the event. That's right, one of Arknights' iconic early villains is now playable and completely for free. And last but not least, introducing Valpisfoglia, or Sizuran's mom. She's a deadly vanguard with elite DP recovery skills, and she adds a whole new dynamic to team building. Log in during the event to get 10 free pulls, a limited outfit for Sasuro, event furniture, emergency sanity concentrate, a rundum, elite materials, and more. So yeah, smash that link in the description and or the pinned comment to download Arknights. Huge thanks to Arknights for sponsoring today's video. I also wanted to focus on the fallen off part of this video. We're talking about characters that had decent usage that may have, well, suffered a fall from grace. Also, we'll be focusing on featured 5-star characters, so that way we can all collectively regret our pulls. Besides, 4-star characters are a bit more difficult to measure since many of them are given out for free, etc, etc. Now trust me, it wasn't easy for me to see some of our favorite characters on this list. But alas, math is cold and cruel and cares not for how fabulous a character's hat might be. And needless to say, just because your character might be on this list doesn't mean that they cannot clear Abyss 12. Even though the difficulty has been ramping up lately, Genshin Impact is still a somewhat easy-ish game in that every character can still meaningfully contribute to help clear Abyss 12. Now, with all that out of the way, let's take a look at my totally accurate falling off-o-meter, trademark pending, methodology for determining the top 8 characters that have fallen off in Genshin Impact. Our goal here is to see which featured 5-star characters have fallen off with Natlan's release. As such, no Natlan characters will be considered for this list. Don't worry, aha, you are safe for now. I've decided to primarily focus on 3 fallen off rewards. First, we have the Fall from Grace reward, which is the raw amount of percent lost from their peak usage to their usage in the modern Natlan meta. Obviously, the more usage rate you've lost, the more you've fallen off. Next, we have the Delta, which is the percentage of their usage rate that they have lost. This is useful because characters with low peak usage, like 20% peak usage with, for example, 4% Natlan usage. This character would have a much smaller fall from grace, but could still have lost a ton of their own personal usage. And finally, the post-Natlan ratio. This takes the average usage rate pre-Natlan and the average usage rate post-Natlan to see how much the character is still being used in Natlan compared to before. Basically, if you're barely using a character in Natlan, but you use them a lot before, that character has sadly fallen off. So in case you're wondering, the data I'm using is based on these Abyss usage rates from, I believe, YS Helper. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's where the data is from. Alright, so I wanted to give you guys all just a quick peek behind the curtains. There is a method to my madness. You can see here that I have all the Abyss 12 data, and yes, indeed, I did manually input everything from the last time I made a video on this. So yes, this definitely took me a while. Give this video a thumbs up for the sake of my thumbs having to punch in all this data just for this video for you guys to figure out who fell off in the Natlan meta and the Natlan era. So basically what we can do here is we can actually use some of these filters here to figure out who do we want to actually consider. In this case, for this video, I wanted to do featured 5-star characters right here. Well, all the featured characters are 5-star characters, but that's kind of besides the point. And we want non-Natlan characters. Unfortunately, this errors out because you cannot divide by 0 because they did not exist prior to such a thing. So we can just simply do is not empty. And now we have gotten rid of all the we've gotten rid of all the Natlan 5-star featured characters. And just like this, we are now able to fiddle with this data to figure out, all these various metrics in my, whatever I'm going to name it, metric meter thing for this video. So yeah, link to this chart will be down in the description below for you guys to play with and do whatever you guys want. Add your own metrics and however meters and whatever else you want to do with this data. As always, I always try to give back a little bit to the community. So here you go. Have fun with it and do what you will. Without further ado, let's start counting down. Starting with numero 8, the numero uno, Arataki Ito. Ito lost 35.8 percentage points from his peak usage, ranking him as the 20th worst, best, for the Fall from Grace reward. Ito ranks 5th worst in the Delta, losing an eye-watering 90.5% of his peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Ito ranks 8th worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 34% of the time in Natlan compared to how much he was used in his pre-Natlan days. Needless to say, Ito has had a rocky career, and sadly, despite Shilinen's release helping him out a bit, the community had enough of his bullshit. Unfortunately, this certainly wasn't enough to make him meta or even slightly improve his usage. Ito is particularly interesting to me because he actually had a renaissance in version 3.3, where we all collectively remembered he existed to bring his usage rate up to 40%. Perhaps the Golden Wolf Lord or something was in the Abyss for a few cycles, because Ito was actually popping off for a few more patches, before, sadly, unfortunately, tumbling into the obscurity that he resides in today. Okay, I gotta admit, I didn't actually look up to see what enemies were in the respective abysses that these characters performed well in, so I'm just guessing, and hopefully I'm right. If not, let me know in the comments below. Frankly though, if it wasn't for him performing so well for 3 patches, he wouldn't have even been able to fall off. But, well, here he is, in 8th place on this list. Also, Ito has been falling off from his role as the event Archon, as he used to be in pretty much every event. But nowadays, not so much. Number 7, Cyno. Were you surprised to see him on this list? Sigh, no. Cyno lost 36.8 percentage points from his peak usage, ranking him as the 18th worst Fall from Gracer. Cyno ranks 4th worst for the Delta, losing an aggravating 91.2% of his peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Cyno ranks the 5th worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 24.2% in Natlan compared to how much he was used in his pre-Natlan days. Cyno was actually quite popular when he was released, although even then, he had quite a spiky usage rate. Perhaps spiking with certain enemies like the algorithm of semi and transient matrix of Overseer Network, although again, I didn't bother checking what enemies were in each abyss, but enemies like that favor Quicken related characters like Cyno. And shortly after his release, it's all been, well, completely downhill for our favorite trading card game player. Shilinen is a character that can theoretically help Cyno's performance, but alas, not nearly enough to save us from Cyno's amazing jokes. Personally, I expect his usage to remain stagnant at best, and likely get even worse as he has been thoroughly power crept by both Chlorond and Verissa. Number 6 is Albedo. Albedo lost 27.5 percentage points from his peak usage, ranking him at just 25th worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Albedo ranks 3rd worst in the Delta, losing an unbelievable 91.2% of his peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Albedo ranks 6th worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 25% in Natlan compared to how much he was used in his pre-Natlan days. Frankly, I was surprised that Albedo even had the potential to fall off, as that implies that he was actually used. As such, in terms of peak percentage points lost, Albedo ranked pretty low at just the 25th worst. However, the delta and the post-Natlan ratio is where Albedo excelled at, well, being bad, and truly fell off in terms of his usage rates. And while there were certainly a couple developments for him in the meta, like using him with Chiori, as well as Shilinin buffing Geo, it wasn't nearly enough to salvage him from the wrath of the Pyro Archon's power creep. Number 5 is Yoimiya. Yoimiya lost 53.2 percentage points from her peak usage, ranking her as the 6th worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Yoimiya also ranks the 6th worst in the Delta, losing a phenomenal 88.7% of her peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Yoimiya ranks the 10th worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 37.3% in Natlan compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlan days. Now, our favorite fireworks pyromaniac, Yoimiya, has sadly joined our list of the most fallen off characters. At one point, she had a peak usage rate of 60%, perhaps in an abyss that favored Pyro with the Thundering Manifestation or something like that, but alas, I'm basing that off of conjecture. Anyway, Yoimiya was essentially power creeped actually even before she was released, as Hu Tao was the preferred Pyro DPS at the time. And well, since then, both Arlecchino and Mavuika were the final nail in the Yoimiya being meta coffin. Number 4 is Ayaka. Ayaka lost a chilling 62.7 percentage points from her peak usage, ranking her as the 3rd worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Ayaka ranks 7th in the Delta, losing a wet socks amount of 88.4% of her peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Ayaka ranks 7th worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 25.4% in Natlan compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlan days. Ayaka, when released, was an absolute monster, as no one prior to her came even close to having her bursts multipliers. And even through the Sumeru meta, Ayaka actually retained relevance, with a stellar peak performance of 71%. However, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, losing 62.7% of her peak usage. And her damage isn't what it used to be, and that's not even mentioning her issues against enemies that can't be frozen and that move, even a tiny bit. Anyway, I do expect a Cryo Renaissance in the future, but as of making this video, Ayaka takes the 4th spot overall on this list. Number 3, Kokomi. Kokomi couldn't crit the meta and lost 68% from her peak usage, ranking her as the number 1 worst and thus winning the Fall from Grace reward. Woohoo! Kokomi ranks the 10th worst in the Delta, losing 87.2% of her peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Kokomi ranks the 2nd worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 18% in Natlan compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlan days. Personally, seeing Kokomi here pained me the most out of all the characters. Kokomi had a heartwarming underdog story as she rose from the scorn of the community ire to become one of the most consistently used characters, at least for a while. Well, her descent began with, somewhat surprisingly, Furina, as Furina applies AoE Hydro, deals way more damage while off-field, and provides way larger buffs. Not only that, but Kokomi's off-field healing was also only single target, making other healers a better choice most of the time. So yeah, despite Kokomi's rise, she ended up falling off pretty hard, way harder than her noodle attacks hit the enemy. The number 2 runner-up for the most fallen off character in Genshin Impact is Venti. Venti lost 31.2% peak usage faster than he could glide, ranking him at a reasonably modest 22nd worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Venti, however, ranks the 2nd worst in the Delta, losing 93.5% of his peak usage rate in Natlan. And finally, Venti ranks the 3rd worst for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 18.4%. Oh boy, how the Archon has fallen. Venti was completely busted on release, and remained quite relevant throughout Sumeru, being everyone's second choice for an animo character after Kazuha. Venti was a great option until, oddly enough, actually I think Furina's release. Furina preferred Jean as an Anima support character for Jean's AoE healing. And with the release of Shilinin, that was the Signora slap that slapped Venti out of the meta, since Shilinin effectively provides the Viridescent Veneer buff to the team, which was pretty much the main reason you would use Venti. Oh right, I almost forgot to mention Venti group stuff. How could I have forgotten? Seems like Hoyoverse also forgot, because since Fontaine, almost nothing relevant can be grouped. And or characters just don't need grouping these days with their massive AoEs. So yes, size does matter, and sadly Venti has fallen off. I've got two dishonorable mentions, Ayato and Child. Unfortunately, Neuvillette and Furina have had such a chokehold on the Hydro meta that these characters have fallen off harder than Child got wrecked by Neuvillette. Surprisingly though, these two's rankings in the fallen off categories wasn't as bad overall as the others. So that's why, in my opinion, they deserve honorable mentions. And number 1, Nilo. Nilo lost 66.9% peak usage, ranking her in second place as the runner-up for the Fall from Grace reward. Nilo ranks the worst and thus the best for the Delta reward, having lost 94.6% of her peak usage rate in Natlan faster than she can kill your own team. And finally, Nilo ranks the worst of all time for the post-Natlan ratio, being used just 11.7% in Natlan compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlan days. So yeah, the number one character who's fallen off the most based on my totally accurate falling off of meter, trademark pending, is Nilo. Nilo won 2 of the falling off rewards, and I guess pretty much no one is using her in Abyss 12 anymore. Abyss 12 has been full of beefy single targets, and usually only one side is hydro friendly, so that typically means people will use Neuvillette for that side. One of Nilo's best buddies, Kokomi, has also taken a big hit, and I do think it is directly correlated. Also, AoE fights, which is where Nilo excels, well, they're completely dominated by Neuvillette, so yeah. I kind of feel bad for Nilo, honestly. I'm sure there are plenty of other reasons for Nilo to be here on this list, but hopefully I've gotten to the core of the issue. So yeah, that's my top 8 list of characters that fell off the most. The spreadsheet will be available in the link down below for you all to develop an even better, totally accurate falling off meter trademark pending, or just for whatever you want to do with it. Also, don't forget to check out today's sponsor down in the link below, as they make these types of videos possible. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.